picture this, a 12-year-old boy kneeling in the snow. He's holding his sword he can barely even lift. Right behind him, his teacher, just standing there, completely silent. No encouragement, no comfort, just watching, waiting to see if this kid is going to quit. The cold has already turned his fingers totally stiff, fumbling around the handle. He has been out there for what feels like hours. Most of the boys who started this exact same training alongside him, they've already tapped out. But he hasn't. Well, not yet.
Welcome to this explainer, where we're looking at a side of samurai history that usually gets glossed over. See, here's what almost nobody tells you about becoming a samurai. It was never just something you inherited, even if you had the perfect bloodline. It was something you had to survive, and the thing that actually broke most of these boys wasn't the sword at all. It was something way colder, way quieter, and far less talked about than any duel. So what did it actually take to survive this? Let's break it down step by brutal step, starting with the part literally nobody expects. Because yes, becoming a samurai meant serving a specific lord, a daimyo, in a system passed down through families for generations. But being born into the right family, that just got you a chance to try. It absolutely didn't guarantee the title.
Okay, so here's the first real surprise. Training started super early, around age 5 or 6, and it didn't kick off with violence at all. Actually, it started with something that sounds, well, almost gentle, before it turns into anything but. At 5 years old, these boys aren't handling real weapons yet. Instead, they're being taught reading, writing, and incredibly strict discipline. Because a samurai was fully expected to be educated and composed, right? Not just some dangerous fighter. There was this massive, strict duality to their education. If a samurai could only fight if he had zero education or self-control, he was looked at as an embarrassing, incomplete version of the role. Honestly, no matter how incredible he was with a blade. Education and restraint were the absolute foundation. But that calm didn't last long.
Here is where things start getting incredibly physically intense. Around age 7 or 8, these boys began training with unpadded wooden practice swords. They called these bakken, and they would use them for hours every single day. Now keep in mind, these weren't designed for safety the way modern training equipment is today. Not at all. Strikes that landed wrong could cause real, severe bruising, broken fingers, or even worse. And the crazy thing, this was considered a completely normal, expected part of the process. It wasn't something to be avoided or prevented.
The protocol here was absolutely unyielding. It was basically, don't cry, reset your grip, and continue. If a boy flinched, or if he dropped his weapon from the pain, or cried out, nobody was pulling him aside to comfort him. He was expected to just reset his grip and keep fighting. Because the real lesson here wasn't actually about the sword strike itself. It was entirely about what his face and his body did in the exact second right after that strike landed.
Historian Stephen Turnbull, who has spent decades digging into samurai history, documents a pretty sobering reality about all this. This training was so demanding that a significant number of boys who started it simply never finished it. They either dropped out, were deemed totally unsuitable, or in some documented cases, they actually died during the training itself. It was just an absolutely unforgiving crucible.
Fast forward to their early teenage years, and the training ramps up even more dramatically. We're talking archery, swordsmanship, horsemanship, and a martial art called jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu focused heavily on close combat and grappling for those terrifying moments when weapons were lost or just unavailable. And the logic here was purely practical, not decorative at all. Think about it. A samurai who loses his sword mid-battle or gets grabbed and dragged into the mud by an enemy, he needs a way to survive that exact moment, right? You can't just stand there disarmed and helpless. Jiu-jitsu meant that losing your weapon wasn't automatically the end of your life.
But the training went way beyond just combat skills. It extended into deliberate physical hardships. Samurai sons were taught to endure extreme suffering as a core part of building their character, not just as some unfortunate side effect of working out. We have historical accounts describing young samurai trainees being forced to walk barefoot through deep snow, or sit totally motionless in freezing temperatures for extended periods, or even go without food for long stretches. This was done specifically to build up their tolerance for suffering and to prove they had self-control even when they were in genuine physical distress.
Now here's a detail that might actually genuinely surprise you. Some samurai families practice a ritual called kanazarashi. Literally translated, it means cold exposure training. Boys, sometimes as young as 7 or 8 years old, would be forced to sit outside in freezing winter conditions for hours, usually well before dawn. And the whole point was to toughen both their body and their mind against discomfort. I mean, just picture this for a second. A boy barely old enough to read a book fluently, sitting perfectly still in the pitch dark before sunrise. Snow is settling onto his shoulders, the only thing moving is his breath in the cold air. He is absolutely not allowed to shiver visibly. He can't ask to go inside. His teacher might just be watching from a distance, totally silent, mentally recording whether this kid has what it takes or if he's going to break. There is no clock, there's no timer telling him when it's over, he just has to stay still until he's told otherwise. The goal here wasn't punishment. It was about building a kind of mental armor that would end up mattering way more in actual battle than physical strength ever could.
Now, to be totally fair in this explainer, we do have to separate the documented historical routines from the exaggerated legends. Some of the absolute most extreme stories about samurai training, including some of those wild cold exposure rituals, they mostly come from later historical writings. They were written generations after the events actually took place, rather than being first-hand accounts from that exact time period. Now, historians generally agree that the court training was genuinely unbelievably brutal, but those most extreme individual stories, they should probably be looked at as representing the spirit and severity of the system rather than a precise literal record of what happened to every single kid. It's genuinely tough work separating fact from legend here, especially since both versions were pretty clearly designed to sound as intimidating as humanly possible, even back then.
What is definitely not up for debate, though, is the unyielding mental armor demanded by the samurai code itself. You know it is Bushido, which translates roughly to the way of the warrior. And Bushido wasn't just about being good in a fight. It emphasized absolute loyalty to your lord, above your own life, honor above comfort, and this deeply controlled, calm acceptance of death. The idea was that death could come at literally any second, and you couldn't let the fear of it change how you behaved in the present moment.
This mental conditioning, it arguably mattered way more than physical skill. Historian Iko Ikami, who has studied samurai culture super extensively, argues that the whole education system wasn't really trying to produce the absolute best swordsman in the world. Instead, it was designed to produce a very specific kind of mind. Someone who is perfectly calm under extreme pressure, completely loyal, and willing to die without a single hesitation if duty demanded it. Think about how different that is from what we usually assume. It wasn't about winning a flashy one-on-one duel. It was about making sure your mind wouldn't crack, or panic, or freeze in the exact moment when hesitation gets you, or whoever you're protecting, killed. So under this philosophy, a slightly less skilled swordsman who never panicked was actually considered far more valuable than a brilliant swordsman who might freeze up when the pressure got real.
So, by the time a young samurai reached his late teens, assuming he survived years of his physical hardship, weapons training, and intense psychological conditioning, he'd go through a formal coming-of-age ceremony called genpuku. This was his official transition into adulthood. It's usually when he'd receive his first real swords, the daisho. That's a matched pair, one long sword, one shorter companion blade. And from that day on, he was expected to carry them and potentially use them in real combat for the rest of his life. Just picture that handoff. The exact same hands that struggled to even lift a wooden practice sword at age 7 are now wrapping around a real, razor-sharp blade meant to kick a life if his lord commands it. Literally everything before this moment, the freezing mornings, the broken fingers, the silent teachers waiting for him to quit, it was all preparation for this one single point in time. Over a decade of pain, failure, and survival, leading to the moment a teenager is formally told, you are now expected to kill or die on command without a single hesitation. And no, you don't get to question your lord's orders. But we have to remember the sobering reality here. Not every boy who started down this path actually made it to that ceremony. Lots of them were deemed physically or mentally unsuited along the way. Some simply couldn't handle the crushing demands and were quietly redirected into other roles within their family. Becoming a samurai was absolutely never guaranteed just because you had the right bloodline. I know a lot of modern pop culture treats samurai status like something automatic, like you just inherited it the second you were born. But no, it was something you had to survive, something you had to prove and earn, year after brutal year, starting from an age when most kids today are just learning how to ride a bike.
So let's loop all the way back to that 12-year-old boy in the snow that we started with. The sword is too heavy. His teacher is completely silent. He has absolutely no way to know how much longer he's going to be expected to kneel out there before anything changes. He doesn't know yet if he'll ever make it to Genpuku. He doesn't know if he'll be one of the survivors, or one of the kids quietly sent away because they couldn't cut it. The only thing he knows in that freezing, miserable moment is that quitting is a choice he can make right now. Staying still is also a choice, and his teacher is just standing there waiting to see which one he picks.
That kid, kneeling in the snow with a heavy sword and a silent teacher, wasn't just being cruelly tortured for the fun of it. He was being slowly, deliberately built. Forged into someone who could stand completely still while everything in his body and everything around him screamed at him to run. So I'll leave you with this thought to take away from our explainer today. Under that kind of relentless, freezing pressure, would your mind have cracked?